Welcome to Conversations with the Planets, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we have our friend and collaborator Jason Holley on, who just recently facilitated a trip to Greece, a pilgrimage to encounter sacred sites that Lori and I went on, along with many other astrologers. So, welcome, Jason. Thanks for being with us. And if you just wanted to give a brief introduction of who you are and what your work is about, that would be really great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great to be with both of you again, even if just by screen. Uh, I'm in Santa Fe. My name's Jason, and I'm an astrologer whose orientation is very much towards experiential and embodied orientations to astrology. So I work a lot with myth and mythology and storytelling, with action methods, and work with engaging people in different ways of connecting with the horoscope, with the living sky, really. So art making, psychodrama or action methods, movement, sound, really a whole host of different ways to connect with this kind of incredible, research resource that we've been given. And I do workshops, I do retreats, different places around the world. And as of our trip, I guess I now do sacred sites tours, it, this was the inaugural trip. It very much the intention to make regular pilgrimages with people to Greece. So that's a little bit about what I'm up to. Yeah.
It's amazing. And
Amazing.
I know when I saw that you had announced this Greece trip, I was so excited to sign up because it was a pilgrimage focus and it was focused on going to the sacred sites and having that embodied ceremonial experience of being there and really feeling the deities and letting the land speak to us. And I know, like, before we started recording, you were sharing some really beautiful reflections on the power of being in the land and in that space and the way that the gods can really show up when we're in their homes. And so I was wondering if you wanted to share a bit more on your reflections about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, as I was saying to you before, one of the things that I heard myself saying, and it really is kind of like that, in these situations, you're not really planning much ahead. But was that, we're on the land of our gods, and so as astrologers or astrology enthusiasts, whatever you think of yourself as, most of us are probably saying the names of these gods multiple times a day or thinking it when things happen in life or whatever it might be, whether all the time. And, of course, with our planets, we're frequently using the Roman names, but it's still the same beings. And for me, what's one of the things that's always been powerful about being to Greece, I've probably spent about half a year cumulatively there. And and what's very powerful is that, the land, these stories are woven into the land, like where we are, they're woven into the sky, but most people don't even see the sky very much nowadays with the flood of light at night. And but in Greece and in that part of the world, the stories are very much woven into, right, that you look over this way and that's the hill where Ganymede is abducted, right, and you look that way and that's where the annual Eros Gamos sort of marriage ceremony with Hera was being conducted. And so you're just inside of it constantly. And all of the different names are the names of stories, the names, place names are still that way. There's certainly a Christian overlay that's also going on there. But as you saw, almost anytime you scratch a Christian side, you discover that there's another story as well, and that they're actually in conversation, which is quite beautiful, right? They're mapping across time,
Mhm.
because it's the spot, right? It's never been about the buildings. It's the spot, it's the place.
Yeah.
People have a sense something magical happens here, something meaningful, somebody lives here, and we want to remind ourselves with a building. But the spot is the thing, and so you do have those layers, and it's just an incredible experience, as you know, to really be inside of that the whole time. I think what we were saying before too was that as someone who's often, I'm facilitating different retreats and workshops and that kind of thing, we speak a lot about how do you hold space or, create the space, that kind of thing. But when we're in the lands that we have an active relationship with, and of course, many people have that in many lands all around the world, and especially land-based cultures, indigenous cultures, the land is storied. But for most of us in the Anglophone world, we're quite disconnected from the stories of the lands. And so when we go to this place, we're inside of it. And in a way, there's not the work involved to create the space to hear from the gods because you're already interwoven and you're feeling your interwovenness pretty rapidly, I think, when people are there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reflection. And I think one thing to like add to that as well was the power of us all being in the same field together and the collective
Hmm.
energy. There were what, 24 of us total in the group, and we all, you hosted dream circles. We all really came together in this very collective space. And I felt like being in that field with everyone else. And, we kept kind of calling it almost like a collective psychosis where we were creating our own reality. And that really
Yeah.
helped me like tune into the energy of the sites in a way that would have been very different if like just Lori and I had gone, or if I had just gone. The way that we all shared that as a
Yeah.
group really added such depth to the experience as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also a beauty in like all sharing this language of astrology and how it's kind of rare that you really get to have these conversations with other astrologers and then having such a large group of astrologers in one space where we're all experiencing the same things for the first time, most of us the first time, I guess. It's just so cool to see how those different stories kind of resonate with different people very differently. And just like with my work with the asteroids, it was so cool to go to specific places where I had that asteroid prominent, or, being able to connect with some of these characters on that deeper level too, and see like, this is where you were, this is where this
Mm.
happened, like just being able to actually live it instead of just hearing about it.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, and there is such a powerful experience of having others who are inside that shared meaning-making system, right? That kind of what
Mhm.
we were often calling a shared psychosis. I mean, from my perspective, we're always living in shared psychosis, meaning we have
Sure.
shared agreements of what reality is. And
Mhm.
but in this little space that I often think about our bus as our primary abode, even though of course we were staying at different properties in different places, but I sort of think of our little bus bubble moving across, and inside that bubble, right, we've made additional agreements about what is reality. And so what is possible when you're surplus reality, meaning the way you move around the world with what you say is real, besides what we all agree, that this is solid and all these agreements we have. But we all have our own, and sets of realities. This is a psychodrama principle, like that we all carry what they call surplus reality. And the
Mhm.
power of psychodrama, for instance, is that one person's surplus reality, when we do an enactment from their life, or when it's astrology and from their horoscope, their
Mhm.
surplus reality becomes the consensus reality for that period. So we were in that for 12 days, right, where
Mm.
our surplus, and of course it's not like we all have exactly the same notions, but we were really inside that ritual space, right? Where, when you draw the circle in a ritual, when you draw the circle of a horoscope, right? You
Mhm.
are basically saying that now we're inside this, and whatever occurs is the communication of the gods. And what I just remembered, I'll never forget, we had an amazing, as you well know, guide from Greece who was also with us in our trip, and Maria. And one of the things I remember Maria saying towards the end of our trip was like, she, she said, I've never been on a trip like this. And she meant it in a lot of ways. But the one she was saying then, she said, no one has ever spoken harshly to me. Anytime something seems to go wrong, all of you just say, oh, it's the gods. even right down to, as you may remember in Delphi, the
Mm.
discovery of two snakes in the toilet, of the hotel,
Mhm.
which I think would normally occasion a freak out and all sorts of things, but it was immediately, by the person whose room that was immediately translated as a appearance of the oracle. And
Yeah.
indeed, and that's not to discount that it is also something you don't want to happen in your hotel
Right.
toilet. And what happened? They got flushed, but still, that capacity that is there. And I think it's what we're always doing with astrology. We're listening and trying to track the movements of powers, gods, archetypes, psychology, whatever your way of seeing that is. We're tracking it. But yeah, to have 12 people together in a land that's really supporting it, or 21 people, whatever it was,
Mhm.
12 signs, I suppose,
Mm.
have that experience is really, and again, to stay in that level of activation together for that's why I think it lasts for us. It imbues, things glow with the remembrances of that, and it
Mhm.
partly, yeah, it has to do with that building that happens when we keep, each of us stirs the cauldron with each of our reflections, our dreams, sharing something from our own horoscope. Yeah, it's a very special thing, but I think Maria is the one who can tell us how special it is, because she's taking people through these places all the time, but they are tourists, and we are pilgrims, and that's I think a really meaningful distinction. Not to take away that, of course, we're paying tourists and doing that, but we
Mhm.
are additionally pilgrims, let's say, and that's what,
Yeah.
right?
And one thing that struck me was one of our fellow participants near the end of the trip was reflecting on like the notion of being special and how we could think that we're special at these sacred sites because we're here doing ritual, connecting with the deities,
Mm,
being very different than everyone else. But we were also tourists rolling up in our giant
Mm.
tour bus, getting our tickets, being whistled at by the
Yeah.
people, and yeah, in Delphi especially, we really offended the whistle like rule enforcers because we were like pouring honey and taking our shoes off and lying down and like connecting with the ground in different ways. And so, yeah, we absolutely were tourists, but then we did have that additional nuance of
mm.
being there as pilgrims as well. And yeah, would you want to dig into a little more what that means? Like, what is a pilgrimage? How is that an additional layer of a trip?
Yeah.
Mm. Well, I think again we begin with that word sacred. That we're going to sites that we hold to be sacred. Not only sites that are about collective history and collective memory, but that are actually particular places, and that again, since we're in astrology, whether people think about it or not, the first statement of astrology is we're in a connected, alive universe. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If there's no other way to see that. So we are animists, whether we imagine we are or not. And so we are going with the notion that, again, that the land is alive in this way, and that it was speaking, right? That there's a reason, which we can't necessarily say, oh, that's the reason, but we can say there's something about this place, Delphi, where these oracles were received for over 1,000 years, and people came there to work with perplexing questions, and so. So as the pilgrim, we are going to have some form of a direct encounter with that, of an honoring, of a reverencing, and of again, direct lived experience of the energy of the place, and with a notion of uh, the sacredness of that, and with a notion, I think, as we were discussing before, of going, and then also of bringing that back into the world in some way,
Mm.
right? We go and we bring back, uh,
Yeah.
in the old hero's journey ways of seeing, the hero goes to some place, has an encounter, and brings back the elixir, right, or the medicine, um, something that is can be shared, because as we were saying in that same conversation that you mentioned, we are we're not just there to extract. We're not just there.
Mhm.
Again, it's not just extractive or for our entertainment. we're there to move into relationship with. And then, of course, when we come back, we are altered in the way, I mean, as you probably already feel, like the way that you tell a story when you're sitting with someone with their horoscope, or what you remember. I certainly, in the last few weeks, fresh from our journey, share pieces of it when I'm sitting with someone with their horoscope, and uh, it just naturally arises, right? I see something, and it takes me to a story, and then it takes me to to Eleusis, right? You see somebody with strong Ceres placements and Pluto, and you can't help but invoke, and again, it's invocation, right? It's not so much description. This language has these functions of description, but as astrologers, I think our most powerful work is when we can invoke, and
Mhm.
nothing like a photo of that place or a description, just a description of the place, which invokes, right? You don't even need to do the work
Yeah.
of interpretation. You can look at somebody's chart and say, I look at your fourth house, and I think of the cave of Pluto, where I sat and had X experience. Um, and and even if you don't share it, when you see it, right, you'll see it, because now that land
Yeah.
and the sky are woven for each of us. So I think it infuses so many moments of our interaction. I have an Iliad group right now that you're in, Alicia, and I find that, these, different moments, the appearance of different gods, Apollo makes lots of appearances, and I'm taken to our trip to Basai, with that temple in the midst of the Pholoif, or in the
Mm.
midst of the Arcadian forests. Um, and again, a lot of times this is just a feeling. It doesn't even necessarily get shared, but it does get shared, because we've been shaped by our trip. Our mouths have been shaped, our experience
Mm.
of the gods and the planets which symbolize them.
Mm.
Yeah, that's super cool. And something that I've been kind of reflecting on lately too is so one of my closest friends has both Hera and Juno really prominent in her chart. And so when I got to be in some of Hera's spaces, it was so cool to think of my friend and her energy, and almost it felt like I was there for her in some way.
Mm.
And she had asked me to bring her back something from Greece, like as a souvenir. And I just remember having this moment at her Hera's temple and looking down and thinking to myself, my friend could buy herself anything that she would want to buy, right? Like I felt like what she needed was just a collection of things from this space. And so I just started kind of aimlessly walking around and just picking up some sticks and twigs and grass and like flowers and just things that were on the ground, some rocks and those cute little shells that were everywhere. I just picked up a bunch of stuff for her and I like made it really cute in this box to give to her. And I just remembered thinking like how special is it that like we get to gift the land to each other instead of like going on a trip and buying some souvenir, right? Like buying something that you could get at any corner souvenir shop. Like this is something that's actually going to be really meaningful for everyone involved. And I just think that was so cool to have a moment like that and just like kind of appreciate how like different this community is and how people appreciate things like rocks and sticks from these sacred lands almost just instead of just, you know, things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Again, it invokes, right? It
Right.
invokes it, and there's something that, and I think about, collecting waters from some of we visited so many
Mhm.
springs, right? Including springs that perhaps don't have that story at this point, and we don't even know their story, but we have a sense as we're going up to Basai, right? Oh, this is something special about this grove where this little fountain is that's coming off the mountain. Um, and we stop. And then, of course, there are other times when we are, with one that is quite well known, like the Kanathos spring where Hera bathed, or the Castalian springs at Delphi.
Hmm.
And then those waters, I'm sure, came back with many of us and become part of our own ways. And it's quite powerful. And you also reminding me too, so when I finished our tour, where I went back to was actually those Hera sites. I felt very called back there. I was on our trip in the wake of a pretty recent, the ending of my relationship, uh,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of heartbreak in me. And I remember during our trip, I had just a really strong feeling when we were visiting, particularly the Argos Horion. I had a very strong feeling of like, oh, I'm gotten here. I am received, in my heartbreak. Certainly we know that Hera, Juno, understands that. And although that just happens sort of spontaneously. And so I made a choice to go back to that area. But what I'm reminded of is that, we were going to a mix of sites, right? We, of course, were going places like the Acropolis, Delphi,
Yeah.
places that
Mhm.
people often visit. But we were also visiting places such as the Argos Horion, where I would say, if I had to guess based on my various visits the following week, I would imagine, an average of 20 people a day, maybe 40 at them. I mean, and some days one or two, like when I would go every morning, which was pretty fun because I would show up at 8:30, and it just so happened that week at about 8:30 every morning, Juno was rising, the asteroid.
Mm.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, isn't that just, and so,
Yeah.
I'm waiting, the gate opener comes, and which is his only job is to open the gate and sit in the booth, for the day. And he would open the gate and I crossing and Juno's rising. Um, but again, I'd be the only person there the whole time. I might stay there for an hour or two as just kind of my morning practice while I was there, but uh, no one else even came during that time. So, you know,
Mm.
there is a way too that this is another special thing about this is being able to go to places where people aren't sort of trampling all day long and talking all day long, where we can still hear things, experience things in our bodies. It's the interesting trade-off of a life in astrology, right? That on the one hand,
Mhm.
you often wish that the larger world had a fluency with you, and and certainly we share that. But because we're also an esoteric tradition, there are values to the hiddenness of things, and you know
Yeah.
we certainly know most animals hide, right? That most animals hide most of the time. So I always think those creatures in us, and astrology might be such an animal that kind of hides and reveals itself when you've
Mm.
spent some time with it, and it knows, yep, you can be trusted. I can share myself with you. um, and that's how I feel when we go to some of these places, where you know oh, somebody's visiting, and then the land sort of opens up to you a little bit, shares a little something. um, yeah, just a really powerful.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful, and that makes me think of last December, Lori and I went to an asteroids retreat with Demetra George, and we're learning which asteroids are prominent in our chart, and you're like, who's Philomela or who's this being? And we're engaging with different deities, and Demetra talking about like how happy these beings must be to be named again, for us to be speaking their names again and connecting with them and living with them. And that's how I feel like the way you're talking about the land and these sacred sites, like how happy
Yeah.
those spaces must be to have us visiting them and connecting with them and feeling their energy and the aliveness and the relationship that's present there.
Right.
And then it also makes me think of something that I just keep reflecting on with asteroids, because there's like over 27,000 asteroids. It's overwhelming to know which
Right.
ones are prominent in your chart. And what I have witnessed time and time again with asteroids present in my own chart, people's charts in my lives, is that they'll make themselves known to you when you're living out their mythology or when you're ready to receive them. And Hera is actually such a good example for me personally, because after I went to Demetra's retreat, I was pretty familiar with most all of the prominent asteroids on my ascendant. We were working with that for several days. And I somehow did not realize that Hera was conjunct my ascendant. I think it's because I have my ascendant's 28 degrees Libra and I have Hera at 0 Scorpio. So it's like 2 degrees away, but a different sign. And then when we all met together on the first day with our pilgrimage, and you had printed out our charts with some of the deities that we'd be, interacting with on the trip, I noticed I had Hera on the ascendant, and then she came through the loudest on the
Mm,
trip for me. I felt so much anger actually when we were at her site, which is very of the nature of Hera. I felt
mm,
her very loud, very present, and I'm also really starting to live out my own Hera mythology with
mm,
getting into a serious relationship. And the way that Hera's portrayed with what's passed down by the people who had access to write things, and like the male perspective of that is this shrew and this
mm,
like grumpy, angry, hateful woman. But there's so much more nuance to Hera than that, and there's so much nuance of like utter devotion and utter love, and like what do you get from marriage and partnership and from being in relationship with others, and um you know just a lot that I feel like is kind of our role now, is how do we live out this mythology and connect with these deities in ways that dimensionalizes their stories and gives them so many more ways to be understood and experienced than just like Hera as the shrew, or you're going to be
mm,
cheated on, or you're going to have a toxic relationship. It's like, no, it's like, and as you've
mm,
pointed out, Jason, with the Iliad, like most of the gods change sides throughout the Trojan War, but Hera is so loyal. She's always loyal to the Greeks. And like, what's the power of, I've been learning a lot about loyalty this year with my relationship as well. But I just think it's astounding that Hera didn't make herself known to me last year. And then once we came to Greece, she's like, I'm here. You're living
mm.
out my
Mhm.
mythology.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that experience that we have, no matter how long we've been looking at our own sky, suddenly something points itself out. I always think
Hmm.
about my Jupiter, I have a very, lovely Jupiter trine to my sun Pluto conjunction. And
Mhm.
I didn't
Mm.
really even notice it for years. And I mean, I've grown up in astrology, right? I've been looking at my horoscope since I was, I don't know, 10, 8. I don't even know. It was done when I was born, but the this thing that I really, I suppose I'm sure I'd taken note of it or something, but didn't really have any psychic authority for me until all of a sudden, right? A few years ago. And um you know, people sometimes have that experience, when they change the house system, but you don't need to even change anything. Just as you say,
Hmm.
we'll disclose when it discloses. And I always feel like that's kind of the whole nature of a human life seems to, and this to me, an astrological life is the question of, there are all these gods with all their injunctions and all their desires, and how are you going to work with the whole thing? Because they're all there. They have different
Yeah.
opinions about what you should do with every single decision you make. And how are you going to honor them? And in some sense, there's just no way that we can do it all. We're going to have to do it over time. We work in time. They don't work in time. They can pop in and out of time, but we work in time. And have limitations. So, it's like it makes so much sense that parts of the sky or parts of the pantheon disclose themselves at different moments, because we simply can't track all of that, no matter how much
Hmm.
astrology we know. I also want to pick up, you use the word dimensionalize, which is one of my favorite words with astrology and with myth and
Yeah.
place, that place, myth, and story really open the archetype out of the constraints of language, out of keyword,
Mm.
and out of concept into story and relationship, right? You
Yeah.
enter, both of you are describing that you related to Hera. All three of us. Of course, she's a great one to teach that lesson of relationship.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
But we are in an active relationship, which also means sometimes you protest. It also means you get frustrated with, like,
Mhm.
it's not a mere like, okay, now I'll do what Hera says to do. And from my perspective at least, I think you'll see this in myth constantly. You again, if in the Iliad, why are you bothering me? Right at the beginning, Achilles wants to draw his sword on Agamemnon, and here comes Athena grabbing him by the hair, and saying to him almost word for word, don't use your sword, use your words, a very modern statement. But,
Yeah.
and then he says, why are you bothering me? You're doing, it's not a prostration, right? It's a relationship. And at
Mhm.
times, of course, these beings are more powerful. So you do have to think about that. But it's relational. It's a relational process. And I think that is the
Mm.
beauty of pilgrimage, the beauty of myth, even astrology, if it's offered that way, is that you're invited to relate to all of this rich world of relations, that we're inside of. And yeah, and again, it's almost not optional when you're on the land and when you are
Yeah.
with people who know the stories. Again, you can be on the land and not, one of my favorite experiences too when I'm alone, uh, traveling in these places. It's always really interesting, like to go to a site and, as you now know, uh, you know the the signage, the way you enter the site. It's really quite disconnected, frequently not giving you much orientation, not really. So often when you arrive to the site, you're basically arriving to wherever was closest to the road. The road is
Mhm.
the modern road, and that decides how you're going to get to the site, not how did people go there or what was the orientation. Like, why did you enter places from the east? As you now know, the west is the sacred place where the god lives. So we were at times, right, moving across the sites before we even go and speak of them, so we could kind of walk the pilgrim's way, which always reminds me of astrology, because I really feel that um, the same when I'm alone at a site that's like that, and I don't always have the resources or they're just not out there that tell you about it. It's always this very interesting process to go. Of course, you have to go in the way that you can, but then you're trying to sort of feel into what's the internal coherence of this land and this place, like what is likely to happen, and you sometimes you can get actual historical validations, usually actually, but you're dropping in below the skein of concepts of archaeologists, of all of that, to really get into the living quality of the space. And it's very similar to astrology, where if you stay at technique, if you stay at delineation and lines placed all over the sky and perfect 30-degree signs, and all the elegance that many astrologers think is so cool about whatever their system is, um, but we're going to have to drop below at some point, I hope. And sometimes it takes some time in a consultation. Other times you drop immediately because of how you come in or the other person. But you drop into the living experience of the field of the chart, like you're no,
Yeah.
you, and you'll see that you do end up walking the lines and you do end up honoring the techniques. It's not as if you throw them out, but it occurs in this organic way that's led by the stories that matter the most in the moment. It's very similar. It's just every time, and it's one of my favorite experiences, is to go to a site that I've never been to and that actually doesn't have a lot around it, and just do this. And it's
Mm.
it's the only sort of, I don't like that word detective for astrologers, but in that one I do. Like, I feel like I'm always looking out for, like, where's the drop, that will get me into the organic experience of this.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so yeah.
Yeah. To build off of that a little bit, we've been teaching an astrology course here at my shop, and we just had the first class on Tuesday. And something I was talking about is how if you look at your chart as if it is the current sky right now, what do you look like, right? Like, what does your chart look like? And I started telling everybody that every year around my birthday, when the sun is in Aquarius, I find the day that the moon is in Aries, and around 3:30 p.m., which is about when I was born, I will go outside and I will look at the sky and I will see, oh,
Mm.
there's my 8th house sun, there's my 10th house moon. And I sit with that energy and I look at the sky because that is me. And I feel like there's this embodiment of your chart that a lot of people miss. And we are actually just talking about this today, but I have my Venus and my moon conjunct, but they're in different signs. And a lot of astrologers will look at that and say that's not a conjunction because it's out of sign. But even though it's out of sign, if you look at it in the actual sky, you would see a sliver of a moon and you would see Venus right next to it. And they were right at the top of the sky anyway. And so there's this living embodiment piece of astrology that I think so many people tend to lose. And I mean, we all do it. I've lost it a couple times too. You kind of have to go back to it. And my Aquarius brain will sometimes be, what's the math and science? And I have to remind myself, like, hold on. Like, there's a living, breathing aspect to it too. And, sometimes you just have to step back and say, like, yeah, the rules might say that this is not a conjunction, but what would it look like to be there? And being in Greece kind of felt that way as well. Just kind of this, like, how did it feel? What did it look like? What was it like to embody these characters? I ended up having a really profound connection with Persephone once I was there, because she's on my sun, but I have so many really prominent goddesses on my sun that she's just one that I haven't really spent a whole lot of time with. Um, but the first conversation me and John had actually was that he had Pluto on his sun and I had Persephone on mine. And after
Right.
that, after that, he started pointing out every single time I was running around picking flowers in the fields or just like things like that. And I started noticing all of the times that she's actually been really present in my life this whole time, but I haven't really spent the time to connect with her. So it's really cool to finally just be in those spaces and realize that, you're not just acting it out because you're there. You've been doing it the whole time, but now we're seeing it. We're
Yes.
seeing it play
Yes.
out.
Right. And partly, as you said, through the mirror that other people can offer, that
Yeah.
help us to see and help us to feel it. And I'm that
Yeah.
word about dimensionalizing, because I think that can
Hmm.
happen with astrology, where the 2D chart, that people call it a chart. That's why I like to say the horoscope, in part,
Hmm.
it returns us to the sky, the view of the hour, right? That's horoscopos. And so that is a different way, but it can get very limited to do that. And the map, of course,
Hmm.
is never the territory. And again, if you just describe the map and you do not invoke the territory, then you've really missed something huge. And that really, I think that is for any kind of approach with astrology, that there's a chance to let it go, because we know maps always conceal more than they reveal. I mean, they do reveal something, but they're this interesting creature that reveals by concealing, right? Because it takes a lot of stuff out, right? All we've got those little glyphs and this thing. So it does pulls something out, but we have to keep remembering it's in order to do that, it has concealed a massive amount. And so the question also becomes, is there this, how do you unconceal? And even the Greek word for truth, right?
Hmm.
Aletheia means not forgotten. And that is actually what it
Hmm.
means. So you're unconcealed, you're the thing that is not something. And I don't know, there's just when you're speaking about that, and again, that's so available to everybody. It doesn't
Hmm.
require a trip to Greece or that
For
kind of
sure.
course as an amplification process. But we can all have that by this kind of giving ourselves freedom with imagination. When you are both asteroid enthusiasts and practitioners,
Hmm.
both, and I've always felt with the asteroids that one of the best things about them is that because they haven't been disciplined by 3,000 years of
Yeah.
philosophy of astrology, that myth is given a much greater role in helping us get to know them, right?
Yes.
Astrology divorced myth, around the 4th century, 5th century BC, or really
Mhm.
never even was married to myth in the Greek world.
Sure.
Uh, but and for people who don't know what I mean by that, I'll just say, that if we go to Homeric and archaic moments, right, the Greeks weren't tracking the cycles and the planets the way that, say, the Mesopotamians or the Egyptians were. And so by the time they were doing that, by being in conversation with those cultures, right, um, it was also the moment when Greece was giving up myth and moving towards philosophy. That was just kind of what. So the astrology got married to the philosophy, and I've always felt like the asteroids have this role of helping
Yeah.
really bring myth forward and be, like a good wine.
Yeah.
You want certain notes forward, uh, and they are one of the places, and we can do it with all the planet. I certainly live the planets
Mhm.
that way, but it's harder for most people because we've just been given a whole layer of conceptual,
Yeah.
which again is meaningful. But if you reroute it in the mythic rise, mycelium, then you just infuse it with a whole storied life that, again, it rarely departs from the concepts and the techniques. They are meaningful, but they just don't tend to, meaning doesn't jump from one body to another through words and techniques. It jumps through feelings, emotions, stories. That's how it jumps, where
Yeah.
we were in that jump all the time. Right? The
Yeah.
words alone would have never gotten us to that jump.
Yeah, and I think there's something so special about having the language and the knowledge of the asteroids that like we can use to constantly, even me and Alicia point them out in each other all the time.
Mhm.
And even just noticing and paying attention to little things in your surroundings. Um, this is a funny example, but I noticed my hairbrush is the brand is Fast Flow, and that's literally what Okiro's name translates into. And she's like my favorite. And I was like, even my hairbrush that's just been sitting here on my
Mhm.
bathroom counter for how many years? And I wouldn't have noticed that, but it's one of those things where it just feels like a little nod, and it's like, oh, how cool, how funny is that? And it's this little inside joke or like this language that, I mean, nobody else really understands, that it's so cool that we have this.
Mm.
Yeah, another example of that is I've been spending like so much time in the gym because I'm doing physical therapy for my knee recovery, and this arm machine where you do like wing type arm things
Yeah.
is like a carrion something is like what is on the machine. And of course, like Icarus and his wings. And Lori even pointed out when we were on Icaria that the island itself is shaped like a wing. So of course
Yeah,
that's where that mythology comes from, right? But they are these little nods, and it's just, I mean, there's way too much information for our minds to process everything that is around us all the time. And so it's just a
hmm,
practice of attuning ourselves to like what we want to be picking up and noticing. And I feel like that trip was so helpful in helping us really like get our reps in and
yeah,
practice throughout the whole experience of like everything
Yeah.
is the God speaking to us all the time. It is, but in that trip especially, it's like this is all oracular. And then if you get into that experience of like, even today I was walking and I was thinking about the upcoming Mars retrograde, and then I walked onto the path and I found a pair of glasses that someone had forgotten, and so I walked back to put them at the entrance to the path, and I walked forward again. I'm like, of course, I'm thinking about a retrograde, and here I am retrograding, right? And it becomes more significant when you're able to tune into it in that way.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's consciousness training, right? I mean,
for
in
sure.
many ways, the active ingredient of astrology is consciousness,
Mm.
and the
Hmm.
consciousness of the practitioner. The models and the techniques and the all of that is of course how we orient ourselves, in time and space. We get some orientation, but it's consciousness, and so a trip like that is a sensitizer of consciousness, right? It becomes even more habitual to do that. For one thing, you are taking in a lot more of information about who are these beings and what does it feel like to be with them, so that you do then notice more, when somebody's speaking, you are, brought to them more quickly. But as you say, there's a sensitization of just the habitual process of doing that, like, even just the movement that you did. I so often, right, in consultation or in life overall, movements and way gesture to me is one of the ways that the gods make their
Mm.
appearances, and how someone's gesturing, and not like there are rules like, oh, this is always so and so, but you begin to see who's moving me, right? The astrology question is almost always who's talking when I'm talking, who,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of the Greeks and, the ancient Greeks, was that, the separate self, if we're, again, this would be rewinding to Homer and backwards, Homer and the archaic, where the separate self hasn't quite taken fully as an operation, like in Homeric Greek, there's no word soma, right? There's no body. That doesn't there is that word, sorry. That word exists, but it only refers to a corpse. Right? So
Mhm.
there's no word for a living body. There's words for organs and all of that. So when I think that through and wonder about what that's about, I begin to feel like, yeah, because there's the sense of being one unified thing is a something that's going to come online even more, right? Same way that we know that we don't have any personal horoscopes until I never remember, but 4th or 5th century BC, and
Yeah.
there's no personal. There's a horoscope for the king or the land or that.
Mhm.
And so the notion of the personhood, a unified personhood, is less. It's a little blurrier, right? And that's how. And what there is a sense of is being moved by different things at different moments, right? You have your thumos, your heart that the gods can interface with, or Hera was the one who always went to the phrenes, the lung, heart, nervous system kind of organ. It's more relational, by the way. The thumos is very like me and my truth. Um, and so, but that notion of multiplicity, right? They like when they apologize, they barely say I'm sorry. They more say, I wish I hadn't done that. So and so confounded. Ate made me do it. Zeus made me do it. Whomever, and that wasn't what we if people do that in the modern world, it seems like discounting responsibility. But I think it has a lot more to do with the porousness of the self as it was experienced. And so, in that same way, when we are speaking, when we're doing anything, we can be tracking, this multiplicity of beings, of stories, of symbolism, whatever your way of experiencing it is moving you, is speaking, whatever that might be. And again, there are these moments where we draw a circle, which just in some ways just focalizes our attention, or we go on a pilgrimage and it focalizes our attention, or a sacred site focalizes. Even the drawing of the horoscope can focalize, like, okay,
Mhm.
now I'm paying a little more attention. Now I'm tuning into second attention, right? Not just regular attention. But I do think it becomes, as most astrologers know, we look at collective events and see the gods. We look at our lives and see the gods. We are altered in some way, and we're on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And it was really funny, like a week or two ago, we were taking a walk with a friend, one of my best friends, and then her partner, and they're both really into football, so they were both just like watching the game on their phone while we were walking, and like they were wearing football gear and what, like all the stuff. And as we were walking, I had never really had this experience of hanging out with people who like openly like sports, I guess. But multiple people would be like, "Oh, are you watching the game right now?" and would
Yeah.
start like interacting with them. And they were like, I just started noticing how many people were like, "Oh, the score is this," or whatever. And it became this big conversation. And John turns to me and he goes, "How cool would it be if we lived in a world where everyone spoke the language of astrology and we were just walking and somebody turns to us and said, 'Oh, Jupiter's on the midheaven right now,' like, or 'Mars is rising, be careful.'" And I was like, how weird of a world. And that really, like, that's been in my head since he made that joke, because I was like, how weird would it be to not be the odd one out in these conversations? And that's kind of how I felt in Greece, was like, something would happen and everyone would be like, "Oh, well, let's check the chart of the moment right now." And there was always somebody screaming something like that out. And it just brought up this thought process of like, what if the whole world was like that? And it actually almost made me like thankful it's not, because
Mhm.
I mean, as nice as that would be, it's kind of nice that we have this almost like secret language that we speak that's not as mainstream as like football is, or, those type of things. Like, it's how cool is it that we just have our one thing, and we get to really like live through it in such a special way.
Which again, I think that's the power of esoteric,
Mhm.
traditions, is their
Yeah.
wisdom traditions, and they are, the not being out in everywhere is not an indication of failure on our part or failure on the people who don't know it. It might just be exactly the container, the alembic that is needed for it to remain alchemical and not just, I would offer that, I mean, I'm not into football, but I do like sports.
Mhm.
I like the sports I play. I like to watch the sport
Sure.
volleyball. I love to watch competitive volleyball because I play competitive volleyball, but I
Sure.
don't find it especially mythic, although let
Mhm.
me tell you, I have like good Mars game when I play. Uh, and I'll just say, what is my favorite thing to do in volleyball? Absolutely, my favorite thing to do is block. And I have Mars in Taurus retrograde, so like you will not get past me. And in fact,
Yeah.
I'm sending it back. It's my favorite thing to do. I mean, I get
That's so funny.
oh, it feels so good. But that said, yeah, there is a loss, and but I do think that like one way for us when if people do feel, and I think that not everybody is in the astrology community as much, right? People who live
Mhm.
in places where it isn't, or whatever, and but I do think that moving out of the astrologies, and the names of planets and all of that kind of thing, we can share this in ways that relate to people. I was thinking about while we've been doing the Iliad class, I'm often in a cafe with a copy out, and most cafes I know most of the people, but still it's a kind of amazing, and because I go there and we're friends and I never actually end up working. But I will put that book, and I have to make a really conscious decision every time, like, do you want to be interrupted? Because if I put the book out, somebody will whether I want to be interrupted in a conversation or if I'm working myself, um it will almost always I will meet people constantly just through the display of that book, and where they say, "Oh, you're reading Eliot," "Oh, that's whatever that is." Like, I think there is a
Mm,
hunger and interest, um, and so there is a
yeah.
way that we can, and at times I really do choose like not to have it visible because I think I'm not, enough already. But with astrology, similarly, right? There are ways to
Yeah.
put it out there. My experience almost, of course, I live in Santa Fe, and it's almost if you are Santa Fe, and particularly if you're a white person in Santa Fe, it's highly likely that you know your chart. Like that's kind of a whole thing. um
Sure.
but still, I was always amazed as a therapist, right? I when my intake form, when I had one, would say, birth data if you want. It would just say, I also practice astrology. And it was just like if you want me to look at, and no person ever declined that, including very fundamentalist Christians, so there is a way, I do think there is this curiosity, this experience, and some people's limited experience of astrology will just be getting readings occasionally, or it's going to be so different with each person. But I do know what you mean about and I don't think it's a notion of an elitism, like, oh, we're special and different, as much as it is
Right.
like but there is a certain, for me, even with my website and stuff like that, like I have resisted for a very long time any sort of promotional, any sort of social media, all that thing. And I do think it is in part to say, if you want to get to me, you're going to have to work on it a little bit. You have to be dedicated. And I think astrology asks the same thing. As you know,
Yeah.
it takes a lot to
Yeah.
learn. It takes a very big investment. Or reading the Iliad, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've watched people fall by the wayside as we even go through the book. And fair enough, it's very trying. Um, but yeah, I really believe that hiddenness is a thing that also means that for those who need it, it's really going to be there in a really nice way. you know?
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful, like the things you can do with astrology can become very, very powerful. They can be harmful. It's very, very private. So there's also a place of holding a container for what you're doing with astrology. Like too much pop culture mainstreaming of it could, really, it could be misused in ways that, like, the magic is not held in the same kind of sacred honoring of it.
Well, much of
Yeah.
life wants to be private, you know? I always feel very sad for the social media around because it's you know, like dreams, you know, you're careful who you share a dream and to whom and what, not because even fear, but more just like what we can experience when it stays
Yeah.
close, you know. Uh,
Hmm.
and there are usually ways to share if you're hungry to share something. There are often ways to share it that aren't directly sharing it that still are helpful to to the person. I think astrology is like that. You don't have to tell anybody how you got to what you're saying. You can just share what you feel, what you are experiencing in a very lived way,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
Hmm.
you using the language of astrology. In fact, for consultation, right? That's one of the big mistakes I think a lot of astrologers make is talking a lot of astrology when
Mhm.
that's not that person's language. But
Right.
beautiful thing about experience is that we are all bodily, we all have emotions. So if we speak from there, it jumps. It can't jump with words that don't make sense to the other person. It'd be like speaking a different language. Like, but what will jump it is your gestures, your emotions, your
Hmm.
stories, your memories, images, pictures. That jumps it, right? There used to be this great movement of poetry in the 1800s, electrical verse, and they had a whole notion that the way you write the poem can jump. Like there was a lot of electricity metaphors for consciousness.
Mm.
This is around hypnotism and that kind of thing also coming, and this idea that the poem is be like an electric spark. They were very inspired by the telegraph, and and I always think about that with what facilitates the jump. Maybe it's my Uranus Mercury conjunction. Never thought about that before sitting here, but I guess suppose that what really has inspired that. Now I think about it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
um it's funny too because I have a Uranus Mercury square, and I believe
wow.
our Mercuries are both late Libra, so I think that's
Yeah,
actually
that's true.
very
Mine too.
similar Mercury energy. um One thing that you've touched on briefly, but I feel like we could really dig into more is, it takes a lot to be able to go to Greece, to go to these spaces, to be in the spaces. And so, how can people just like right here, right now in their own lives practice attuning themselves to these energies, doing these things, having these impacts that we've been talking about?
Mm.
I hugely think that connecting with the stories and the myths, um, especially by, if you can, reading them directly. And well, not if you can. I mean, if you can read, you can find it. They're in every language. They've been translated to modern languages. Um, but maybe what I mean by if you can is that also takes time. And I
Mhm.
think it's easier to do if you're doing it with others. Kind of just what you said about pilgrimage is very similar. um, where you can reflect together, right? These are in a similar way that people can visit Greece and not really relate to any of the things that we were relating to if they aren't assisted, right? I never finished that thing about when I'm alone at sites and I have kind of dropped in, or else I just already know, whatever how what we're looking at and what to build. It's very fun when a couple or a person shows up and they're obviously not so impressed because they're like, I don't have any idea what I'm looking at, and whatever, and I just love being able to say like, oh, hi, you want to know a little about the place, just like a spontaneous. I see now that I was born to do this tour guide thing. I was very anxious before our trip. Like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this moving around all the time. And, it was like, wow, I'm all over this. But yeah, at these sites, being able to share people. So it's similar when we go to the stories, like when you read the Iliad or read the plays, or, some of it is metabolizable to a modern way, but a lot of it, you need a little bit of help to, talk about it and let it speak to you, help it across. But I really think that's much more fun. And if I were to say where to begin, I would begin with the Odyssey. I think it's very readable to a modern reader. Most people love reading it, from what I've heard. Um, and if they've had no myth, right? Like, because it's one thing to hear other people tell the story. Or synopsize. But it's really the details that will really stay with you sometimes, a particular minor figure or a metaphor that is made that, I just was reading for the first time. I'd never read it before. Iphigenia and Taurus, or among the Taurians, and not our constellation Taurus. It's a different thing, but Iphigenia among the Taurians, and this is a Euripides play. He wrote another one about Iphigenia.
Mhm.
It's more the standard story, meaning sacrificed to get a good win to Troy. She was, this daughter of Agamemnon, and he was led to believe that Artemis demanded that Iphigenia be sacrificed. But Iphigenia and Taurus take some liberties with the story as we understood it was mostly told. But that's a whole thing. This is the thing about myth, it never ends. But what I was just thinking of just now is there's a lot of times the way these stories are told, they're kind of like how I talk, like where they're in the middle of one and they're like, oh, that reminds me. And then there's a whole like little expose of another story, and then you're back to the story you were in, right? They call it ring composition, Again, they draw the circle with this. They often have the same words at the beginning and the end to sort of say, we're inside another place. I just read this, I don't know, this week, and I'm reading it with a group, as suggested. And so, but there was a whole piece about Delphi, uh,
Mm.
about the slaying of the python. So, of course, this, the story of Delphi is that this is initially a site of it's an oracle site. It's Gaia's oracles, right? It's oracles from the earth. Then it's oracles from Themis. It's oracles from the python. And then eventually Apollo comes in and kills the python, and now that's the fame that it gained, was a different level of fame. So here's this story, this brief little interlude in Iphigenia and Taurus, where it's saying, Apollo did that, slayed the Typhon, and Gaia was upset, because she wanted the oracles to go to Themis, her daughter. Themis, by the way, is the goddess of Libra who holds the
Mhm.
scales. So Them and the goddess of, having parties, she arranges the celebrations on Olympus, and that very Libran, and then divine justice. So Themis is to get so Gaia's angry that Apollo has taken it, and so she creates what they called a band of dreams, like a marauding band of dreams, and that they'll be the oracles, and she'll give them to humans so that they don't need to go to Apollo, right? Because they'll have their own dreams. And then Apollo is depicted as a like baby, because he's said to kill the python as a baby in this particular story. And then he goes to Zeus and says, "Oh, please, Father, uh, take away the band of dreams, like take that away from the humans. Don't let them go there for prophecy." So it's this amazing little, just little interlude. Never heard that before. You never hear Apollo represented as a baby. It reminds you of the Hermes, Homeric hymn to Hermes, when he's actually stealing Apollo stuff. So it's an interesting moment. And I've forgotten now why I brought all this up. Because when you read the stories, this is what happens. You get interludes, you get things that don't resolve into a clear picture, right? Like the appearances of any god in the Iliad don't resolve easily, they're contradicting themselves. And yet that's a relationship. That's what it's like to be another human being, right? Like, they're not resolvable into a thing. They're all over the place. So you want to get to know them in their diversity, and how you never really want your partner to be a known quantity. At one level, you want some comfort, but you want to always be surprised. And so if you're reading the myths, that's what I think you get. And then again, it's helpful to be with people and be with contextualizing things. So there are books that do help you know the larger context, like you know, back in the day when we really didn't understand goddess culture and that whole thing, you had a lot of people who wrote books in that direction that gives you a way of making sense of it. And so there's, but those are two that really feel like those are pilgrimages. Like you are in pilgrimage when you are reading that. And in the same way that the land was also gaining from us, right? When we were in Greece, I strongly feel that we are also weaving with the land, right? Again, it's that whole thing like in Braiding Sweetgrass where she says, humans aren't inherently a scourge on earth. Like we actually have often over history increased the diversity in life of earth, right? By the way we've connected with things, we've actually brought more life into the world. That is something we can do. So it's similar when we're traveling as pilgrims rather than just extracting in tourism and getting photos. um, we're also, we're telling the stories while we're on the land, right? Those trees are hearing us too, and their ancestors will carry that along. So to me, there's a similar thing when you're in myth. You are receiving the stories, but then when you connect them to your own life, you're also weaving them onward. And so that's my number one thing. And also to connect with the mythic in any version, right? Like the Tolkien movies are the one thing that I think attains the mythic from the modern. I don't think much attains the mythic, but for me, Tolkien attains the mythic, and so just giving yourself to mythic consciousness goes a long way. And then the other thing would be creating sacred space in the place where you actually are. Definitely learning the stories of the land where you are. Like it's often hard to do that. Where I live, it's a little easier. I live in a place where there's still there are many places where indigenous people have stayed where they were, like Pueblo culture and Navajo and Apache to some extent. So the stories are a little more available where I live, but I would want to know those. And then I would also want to, in my home or in the land around me, create altar space, create something where you are asking the gods to be present. You are inviting that. And it doesn't have to, it can get very literal. And you saw in Greece, right? When people got really literal, like, they served us rooster one day and somebody incorporated that into their prayers that night, and had quite so the literal can be quite potent, but it doesn't have to be all literal and get into all the specificities. And, I'm going to use frankincense for auras, or, it can, but really it's just a simple thing of just sacralizing space, like treating it that way, having a candle on an altar. All those things take us a little step further into place and place making, which is what the Greeks were doing, right? Our land awaits this active relating, I think. And of course, I don't know where people live who are listening, but my assumptions are that if you're, again, if you're in an Anglophone place, you're almost certainly disconnected. And so again, weaving our relationship to place, and like what you said, where you were describing, here is soil from this place to introduce to this place. There is a connecting of things going on. And I did want to say, because I felt self-conscious when you're speaking of bringing things from the land, and earlier we're talking about being barefoot and pouring honey, and I really want to name that, there was a lot of consciousness around these choices. It wasn't, we're
Yes.
not the kind of travelers who just said, oh, we can just do whatever we want here. Not at all. These were slow and thoughtful things. And I think a consistent thing of really asking that, that we respect the people who actually live there, care for the sites, care for them, and still are part of the tradition. So I just want to name that element of it, because again, it's not extractive. It's a really
Exactly. Yeah.
thought process. And really asking ourselves, like, what is respect here? And the answers don't always match what the official thing tells you. They don't always match that. And life is a whole process of deciding which rules are, which rules are actually in the interest of all, and which ones are nonsense. But we don't ask that question. We weren't just marauding about and saying,
Right.
here we go. which does happen at those. I know that's why they were getting on us at Delphi, right? They're getting on us on top of us because they've had other people come there and, tie things around things and break off branches and,
Yeah.
whole different relationships. So I mean, it was quite something when that Saturn came down on me in particular. But again, just to say, I just want to name that because I do think it's why that maybe that comes up is because there is a pause before entering myth of respect, right? There is a moment crossing a threshold. Even when you open the book or you open the natal chart, you pull the chart. In that moment, it's so helpful to take a minute, kind of like what you were saying, Lori, about you make a point of experiencing the sky. I often do that when I just have a consultation. I imagine that sky, and then sometimes I like to share it with people. It's very accessible, especially if the moon was doing something, or just Mars at the top in a red dot in the sky. But there is a moment, right? There's a pause, and you're asking, what's the respectful way to be in relationship? Because it's a relationship.
Yes.
And that's what we forget. The first step is relate, right? The first step is I could keep going, but well, I did. Can I share one thing? It's just
Yes,
like,
of course.
you know, one of the people who helps me with, the Aboriginal culture in Australia, right, has been there for 50,000 years continuously. Now that's people you need to listen to, right? Like they've been relating actively for that long, have very different shapes of how they see the building blocks of life. We operate often through binary and sometimes a third if you're lucky. We are very trained by the Greeks, those philosophical Greeks, to binarize things. And it's an amazing thing to do that, right? I'm in Libra. I mean, I love it. But they're operating with very different diagrams of consciousness. And so there's a writer, Tyson Yunkaporta, who wrote a book a couple of years ago called Sand Talk. Beautiful, and actually uses diagrammatic things to kind of open the conversations. But he has this 4-step thing that he and I'm sorry that I can't remember her name just now, but what is it? Yeah, people can find out. But he shares this 4-step thing about, when you come to a new place, when you come, you begin with respect. That's the very first thing, right? And respect has this implicit thing about to look again, right? That's Latin respect. So you're looking again. And meaning, I think, you sort of acknowledge that what you're used to seeing might not be what's there today. Like I don't know you, like you are a mystery. Like I'm going to look again. And then he speaks about I mean, I'm forgetting. Respect something connects. Oh goodness, I don't remember. Well, look it up. Anyhow, the other one, the ones I remember are respect and then connect, right? Seek to be in relationship with. And then only what he would call direct, meaning act in some way, do something. And for me, that's exactly how to enter a horoscope or a mythology or anything like that, is to begin with that moment of respect, a moment of acknowledgement, and then to seek to connect. And then only maybe you'll do something. Who even knows? The direct thing. And so I feel like that's a constant process, again and again, of every time. And again, all of these things will do what we did in Greece, which is train mythic consciousness, train symbolic awareness, so that you're living in the myth all the time. You don't have to go to Greece for that, right? If you are turning your attention there, it's an attentional thing. It's just that moments like Greece, moments like 25 people in the same room or the same meaning system are helpful amplifiers.
Yeah.
This is a life practice, right? We're pilgriming all the time. You could look at every time you open a chart, right? You're in a pilgrimage. You're visiting a
Yeah.
sacred place that is going to teach you things if you only listen. I really want to remember what those 4 things are.
And we'll link to Tyson's
Yes.
thing down in the show notes so people can
Yeah.
access it there. This has been, Mercury's also like about to go retrograde in Sag.
Yeah.
This has been a beautiful time to be talking about myth, but the like exact mercurial functions are not as available right now.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, and just to echo, yeah, just the respect, the relationship. We were there very intentionally, very much in conversation with the land, not in an extractive way at all. Just really, as Jason has spoken to many times throughout this, like we were giving so much back to the land as well, and really being in this exchange and not extracting. So
And
yeah,
hopefully
definitely
giving
echoing
to the
that.
people too. Hopefully giving to the people too. I mean,
Yes.
we did, of course, quite literally make donations to the working classes of Greece and to the
Yeah.
animals. We made a point of that to enter that in a reciprocity. Is such an
Mhm.
important word. Again, there's a reciprocity with the myth too. You know, like what are you giving back? And it's not from an obligation perspective, like oh you have to be good. It's going to be natural. You're going to want to, right? If you receive, you're going to want to. It's sort of a natural thing. And I do now know what the third one is, and it's not because I remember. I just looked right now. I'm like, I have it, it's one, respect, connect, those two. And then he speaks about reflect, right? Then reflect on it, right? Like once you are in relationship, talk about it, be in it first, then talk about it. Don't talk about it first and then try to get in. And this again, the astrologers, this would be a very useful, because frequently astrologers start off telling you what to do and reflecting, and I did some math and I'd like to tell you about it. And and this is what Yunkaporta says, right? The Westerners came and they directed, and then when that didn't work, they thought, oh, let's reflect. What did we do wrong? And then they can't get anywhere, and they connect finally, and then out of respect they usually left. Right? But we can begin in this other direction, and that reflection stage, it becomes so powerful. Like if you're inside the stories, inside the myth, in your body, then when you talk and reflect and use language and technique, it's infused, it's glowing, right? And it's glowing with all the life force, like, and you're actually developed. That's how
Mm.
technique, I think new techniques that take among our community emerge from that experience, right? They emerge from the living experience of the astrology, and then it takes some language and stuff like that. That we get to kind of go through that every time. I was just thinking too, another way of connecting with the places, I think, is actually listening to myth in the languages that it's actually spoken in. Um, you
Mm.
know, to listen to Greek renditions of things, and it's not because you know it, but again, the sounds open things up, and certainly other Indo-European languages really understand this about sound, like Sanskrit, right? If you pronounce that just right, it's known to be a transmission. It's not simply, Greek. They didn't have that quite that same notion, but the shape of consciousness is there, and also another super fun way to connect and to gain some of this from the pilgrimage is to have someone else read myth to you.
Mhm.
Like I've done that many times in my life with people where we're traveling and we read the stories to each other. Uh,
Yeah.
again, that puts you in that more childlike, open-ended, way. And yeah, we all know how to travel. That was the thing that connected us with Maria. Or I remember vividly the initial 2 days of our trip, and we didn't know each other yet, and she didn't know who we were, and so there was like I would interrupt her and kind of say, oh, we're here for the myth, not so much the archaeology, and this kind of thing. But what I think of as the moment where it really shifted into really a deep partnership was at Sunyon, the Temple of Poseidon, where we got to see ourselves that what you were describing of the crescent and
Yeah.
after sunset. So when we were at the taverna down below the Temple of Poseidon, we stepped into the sea while waiting for dinner. Maria and I think some others, we put our feet in, and in that moment, like something relaxed between us. I don't think there'd been conflict exactly. They're just we just weren't yet in sync. And with our feet in the ocean, of course, right? That's where it shifted. And she says to me, I heard you. Oh, I saw that you're doing dream groups in the morning. And I said, yeah, I'd love to have you there. No pressure. You're working, but if you want. And she said, well, I don't really dream. And I said, oh, uh-huh. And then she said, she said, but often I just close my eyes and I will go and visit places all over the world and I'll see exactly what's happening, and she was essentially saying I astral project. And I just looked at her and I was like, oh, you're one of us. Like this is gonna work out fine. But the point being why I'm reminded of that is that notion that, you can travel from anywhere, right? You can travel from right now. Maybe people, while they've been listening, been traveling a little, like they're, and that the beauty of myth and astrology is that you travel right then, right? You visit every time. There's pilgrimage in every single moment of astrology if we remember to go in that way. If you go in as the pilgrim and not the tourist who's trying to extract advice for a particular issue, that never worked, right? By the way, right, when they went to the oracles, if they tried to force an answer, it occasionally worked, but mostly did not work. Right? They didn't move into relationship with the oracle. They try to just give me what I want. People come to readings that way too. Tell me how to win my court case. And then let's talk about what your court case is in consciousness. Like, how do I know that you should win? What?
Yeah.
I think I'm sorry. I realize I've gone past our notions of time. Yeah.
Oh,
No, beautiful reflections.
yeah, all
Yeah, should
good.
we maybe wrap up? And we tend to just kind of share a little bit about what we have going on, how people can stay connected with us. There's, Jason, if you're comfortable, we'll share your website and stuff down below so people can go find you that way. But if there's anything else you want to share about how people can stay connected with your work.
Sure. I mean, the main way, really the only way, and is my mailing list. That's really how I share things. I don't use the social media and that kind of thing for that. And the kinds of things. So there are a couple of things I definitely want to announce. One is that next year in Santa Fe, from October 2nd to 5th, we just signed the venue, so I can now officially speak. From October 2 to 5. I am organizing what I'm calling the Living Astrologies Conference, and it'll be about 80 to 120 people, of which anybody listening could be a part. And it will be no lectures and no PowerPoints, all experiential workshops and other experiential modes with many different astrologists. It's not just with me, about 20 people, some of whom people might know the names of, and some will perhaps not be as known, beyond their local areas. But this will be comprised of 4 to 6 hour workshops, and then also large group events. Will open and close on the land here. We'll have ecstatic dance with dancing the planets. I have a astrodrama group here, and they will do playback theater of people's charts. So super about living astrology. I am really oddly, and never saw it coming, but I feel a very strong drive to intervene on astrology with an approach more around a life and embodiment, and not only myself, really about a community and building that. So that's the thing I most want to name. Probably in the next week or two, I'm going to figure my calendar for various retreats and things. There'll be a couple that I'm doing in Provence, like an astrodrama workshop, a retreat. And I just do a lot of online groups that are experiential, like our reading of the Iliad. I probably do some of the plays next year. My schedule's just getting figured out. Oh, and the other thing is that I have a practitioner program for people who want to do living astrology and experiential practice. So we have our first cohort about halfway through now, and we'll open to another cohort probably in March or April. But again, all of this, the way to find out is the mailing list. My website will have things, but it really is, there's an opt-in orientation to what I do that you need to take that step. So if people want to, I hope you will.
Amazing.
Great, thank you. That's very exciting. I love that. And I
Mm.
love
Yeah.
the space of having an entire experiential conference together because I've been to some of your
Yeah.
experiential workshops at Norwalk, and it's always a transition going from the traditional
Yeah.
lecture to the experiential. So that's very exciting to just have it all be experiential and see what is possible with that.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think and then this place Santa Fe is just right for it. It's super. I think this will be really alive, and many different ways to be experiential, right? Somatic ways, dramatic ways, art making ways, ceremony ways, talisman making ways.
Mm.
Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
I'm exceptionally excited about that. Partly because I love the people who will also be facilitators, and love and care are at the center of this. This is not a
Yeah.
performance conference. Everybody coming to give their great ideas. This is much more about creating knowledge together, much like our pilgrimage. Like everybody is creating the knowledge. It's not that Jason and Gray. We have things to share, but you know I'm always learning from the way that I do astrology. I'm always fucking learning. And so, this will be with love and care at the center. We'll be also really prioritizing care and not making it a marathon event where you're just collecting experiences, but really building in time for rest, time for integration. Um, and so a little bit different, a bit more of a
Yeah.
structured experience without, controlled experience and
Mhm.
small.
Yeah.
15 to 20 people in a workshop, so you really get to go there. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I
Very
can't
cool.
help
Oh,
myself.
exciting.
Exciting.
No, it's really exciting to feel like we're some of the first people hearing about it.
You
It's
are the
very
first people who are the first official moment that I am speaking this, because
Mm.
we
Wow.
venue the venue really, I mean, I've shared it here and there, but this is the first moment where it goes to an unknown public.
Wow. That's
Wow, yeah.
amazing. We're
What do
honored.
you have going? We are honored. What about you, Lori? What
Um,
do you have going on?
yeah, so I've still been writing a lot, so just kind of another little PSA if anybody has stories about asteroids you want to share. I'm still collecting those. And really just have been focusing a lot on that work. I just finished a tarot course here in Cincinnati. So we have all the recordings that are available now. And we just started an astrology course, like a basic 101. So we're going to have those recorded as well. And it's not too late to jump in if anybody locally wants to. We're also doing a asteroid workshop. That can be attended in person or virtually. So, those are all coming up. Those are all listed on my social media. And otherwise, yeah, just still doing readings and um, all the things. All the things are happening.
So many things. Busy,
So
busy.
many things. Yes. What about you?
I am about to announce a 2025 astrology mapping workshop
Mm,
that'll be 90 minutes talking about annual perfections, and just one of my favorite techniques to work with perfections. It's a really simple, really accessible, very ancient technique. So, really designed for beginners of astrology to be able to jump in and attune themselves to what life topics are most active in their life right now based off of the technique. And then really digging into the nuance of house rulership and planetary condition and solar return charts. So there's a lot of good stuff for more advanced astrologers as well. And just really using that. Annual perfections is most it like is oriented around our birthdays, and our perfected year changes every year with our birthday, but just looking at 2025 ahead and what will be the houses perfected for you. It's just, this time of year is really we start to look ahead, and astrology can be very helpful for that. So teaching
yeah.
that workshop. And yeah, just kind of continuing to slowly get back into things after my knee surgery and my recovery. So more will be coming out of me in 2025 for sure. And I'm just really excited by everything that there is to be sharing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. This was just such a treat to get to sit down and really talk and kind of synthesize everything and share our experiences with the folks who listen to our podcast. So I hope this has been really impactful and inspiring for people listening to us. Yeah, there's so many ways to just connect with myth and the deities and really have astrology be something that lives through us rather than just something we think about and theorize around. And I think that you being here has been really helpful for kind of bringing us into that space because we talk about myths so much on our podcast. And this is really like, how are you living it? So just so much gratitude for you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
glad.
thank you.
Integrative for us too, isn't it? Like just to remember and
Be brief.
be in the magic together. So yeah, thank you.
Mm.
Yeah.